So good morning to folks. Welcome to Charging Up with Volkswagen Settlement Funds. My name is Diana McEwen. I direct the Metro region of CERTs, or Clean Energy Resource Teams, at the Great Plains Institute. I know many of you. We are so happy to have you here. Want to welcome you to the webinar that is being hosted this morning by Drive Electric Minnesota and CERTs together, and talk about, just for folks that don't know, Drive Electric Minnesota is facilitated by the Great Plains Institute. It's a partnership across the state of Minnesota, all about electric vehicles, and we're always looking for new members. We are just launching a new outreach and communication and outreach team, so there's lots of resources for EVs on the Drive Electric site. And then just a little bit, if you're not familiar with CERTs, we are the Clean Energy Resource Teams across the state. We are a partnership, not an organization, with a shared mission to really help communities get the resources they need to do community-based clean energy projects. So, and there's a couple of folks on the phone that are in this picture. And just to kind of start us off, we're going to be talking obviously about the Volkswagen Settlement, and I'll introduce our first speaker in just a second. But in case you didn't know, the state of Minnesota was awarded $47 million from the national Volkswagen Settlement to clean up the air pollution from the diesel scandal from Volkswagen. And it's really to invest in cleaner transportation systems for our future. There are two ways. It's funding vehicle replacement and investing in electric vehicle technology. So we're here to talk about opportunities to fund electric charging stations, specifically with grants from the funding available, which is about 15% of the total. And Mark will talk more about the Volkswagen Settlement and phase 1 and phase 2, and also talk about some of the other RFPs that are out there as well. So I'm happy to have Mark Salzbach from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to talk to us about the Volkswagen Settlement and just kind of an overview. So Mark, take it away.
Still muted. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Salzbach, as Diana said, and I'm pinch hitting for the wonderful and charming Rebecca Place, who's on vacation. So save all your hard questions and send those to her later. One point I want to make is that those Volkswagen diesel cars were pooping out 30 to 40 times the EPA standard allowable NOx amount. So it was a big deal. And this, there's also a cool documentary on Volkswagen cheating scandal on Netflix about how they got caught. Minnesota has $47 million. That's based on the number of offending cars in Minnesota from Volkswagen. And that $47 million is going to be spread out over 10 years. Minnesota developed a plan to spend the funds in 3 different phases. And you can read the plan on our website. Next slide, please. And this is our home page for the Volkswagen Settlement. You can link to grant information on here. If you see the piggy bank, the green square there. There's also funding info and the plan itself in the center in the blue square. If you're interested in receiving our grant announcements, be sure to sign up for the Volkswagen Settlement updates on that far right in that box. And to visit our webpage, we always Google MPCA space Volkswagen grants. And you should know that MPCA had public meetings across the state to gather input from citizens to help form our plan. And I'm sure many of you listening today took part in these meetings or sent us comments. As Diana said, the Volkswagen funds can only be spent on 2 things: replacing diesel vehicles and installing EV charging stations. We are now entering phase 2. Next. So in phase one, there were 25 dual port stations awarded. And those were all, this is level 2, just talking about level 2 right now. Those were, even though workplaces and multi-unit dwelling and mobility hubs were eligible, almost all went to public places. And per the consent decree, public access stations were eligible for 80% reimbursement, where private charging stations were eligible for 60% reimbursement. And installing charging stations is not without its challenges. So far, only one applicant has totally completed their level 2 stations from phase 1 and been reimbursed. And you will get to hear all about it from Brandy later. Next slide, please. So you should be seeing the map of Minnesota fast charging corridors. The dark blue is what was done in phase 1 and anything previous to phase 1. So that gave us about 1,100 miles of highway charging. The green lines are the proposed charging corridors for phase 2. There's a lot of money, $3.5 million, going to chargers in phase 2, and we're expecting 40 to 50 kilowatt chargers that will add 2,500 more miles of highway corridor. So phase 2 is big, and it should have some very positive impacts. Level 2 charging stations are far less expensive, so they're going to get 10% of that 3.5 million. They'll get about 300,000, and DC fast chargers will get 90% of the phase 2 funds, or 3.2 million. All these stations will be grouped into corridors at the time the grant is released, and typically there's about a $65,000 cap for a 50 kilowatt station. Each fast charger station will also have level 2 backup, and stations are future proofed with enough electrical capacity to install up to 350 kilowatts. So we're trying to look to the future, but as technology evolves, we want to be ready. And we know that even with, say, 3,600 miles of corridor, that still won't be enough for future EV charging needs. So phase 2, which lasts 4 years from 2020 to 2024, will have a third RFP, or a third grant for EV chargers. And that will address the charging needs assessed at that time, whether it's more level 2s or increased capacity of fast chargers along the highways. Next slide, please. As a way of review, and this is, again, I'm just giving the kind of skimming the top here. These are the goals for the Minnesota plan. Obviously, emission reductions. The settlement is initially a NOx mitigation effort, but when you replace older diesel engines, you also get big reductions in fine particle, and you get some greenhouse gas reductions. Now, if the new replacement vehicle is all electric, you get huge greenhouse gas reductions. And we've already awarded grants for about 10 all-electric heavy-duty on-road and off-road diesel replacements. And there's more to come. Statewide benefits, because Volkswagens were driven all over the state, we wanted to see benefits in reducing emissions throughout Minnesota. Number 3, helping people in places disproportionately affected by air pollution. So our MPCA modeling shows that low-income people and people of color are at greater risk from air pollution. Environmental justice means that pollution does not harm one group of people more than another, so that all Minnesotans benefit from the same level of environmental protection. And we try to achieve this through grant applications that require the zip code where the equipment will operate. The MPC scores a project for environmental justice benefits based on what % of the project's zip code is made up of areas of concern for environmental justice. Reduced exposure, MPCA uses modeled air concentrations of NOx and PM 2.5 to score applications, again, based on the zip code where the vehicle or EV charging stations will operate. These primary pollutants from diesel exhaust pose significant health risks from outdoor air pollution in Minnesota. Projects located in areas of higher concentrations of NOx and PM 2.5 will receive a higher score in this category. And finally, health benefits. We also score application using Department of Health data on rates of asthma, emergency hospital visits, heart attacks, premature births, and obesity to identify areas of the state where these health conditions are more prevalent. Air pollution can influence health in many ways, and these conditions represent how exposure to vehicle emissions can trigger or worsen health impacts. Next slide, please. Here's a look at our phase 2 funding. And as you can see, the top two, green and the blue, those are all electric related funding categories. So over half of the total funds of phase 2 are going to go to either EV charging stations or electric vehicle replacements. We are spending the maximum 15% allowed on EV charging. Now, a couple things that are coming down the pike here. Look for an electric school bus pilot program to be launched very soon. And after that, later this summer or possibly early fall, there will be a fast charging station grant, followed by a level 2 charging station grant in the fall. We're working on that one right now. If any of you are representing a city or a business with off-road equipment, the off-road DERA grant opened up just about 2 weeks ago, so there's plenty of time to apply for that as well. And you can apply for that and replace your old diesel with an electric through DERA as well. So that's about it. Next slide. If we have some easy questions, I'll take a stab at them. Otherwise, I'll write them down and we'll put them in our FAQs for the Rebecca to answer in the level, the fast charger and level 2 grants.
Thanks, Mark, so much. That was great. And we do have a couple of questions that have been asked in the question and answer chat. So the first one is, will there be a local matching requirement? And that's from Nancy and Catherine.
Yes. I think I said that 80% grants are allowed for public, which would mean 20% matching, and then for private, approximately 40%, at least for level 2s.
Great. And there was a second question. It's been erased, but then some other folks answered it. The question was about where can they find access the map with the disproportionate risk from air pollution. And I know you have maps on your website, and we can include a link to that map in the follow-up to the webinar.
Excellent. Thank you.
Are any funds being set aside for long-term maintenance repairs of the public EV charging infrastructure? Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. In phase 1, we had a 5-year warranty requirement that did include some maintenance. I'm not sure how it's going to be handled in phase 2, but that's a 5-year warranty seemed acceptable in phase 1, and that probably did include, I think it did include maintenance. So that's where I think we're going to be.
But I think that, also the answer is that there's not specifically additional funds for that maintenance. That's part of what the owner of the station has to take care of through the warranty or maintenance contract or something, right?
Correct. Yeah, that would be whatever would be required by us to be included in the grant, and whether that may deduct from the charger amount or the total amount. It just depends how they they work that.
Perfect. Another question from Mary in Scandia. Could a city that's not on a designated corridor apply for and perhaps receive a grant for an EV charger?
Well, they might not receive a fast charger, but they could receive a level 2.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the fast chargers are going to be on the corridors, and individual entities don't apply for a fast charger. A developer applies for the whole corridor. So we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Jim from Def Energy, who had the contract to build out the corridors in the first phase, can talk about what they were looking for in communities to host those DC fast chargers. But for a level 2, a city and entity can definitely apply for an EV charger because the corridors are for the DC fast chargers, not necessarily the level 2. Is that correct, Mark?
Correct. Very good.
Perfect. Other questions? Oh, okay, here's one. Could you talk a little bit more about the school bus pilot?
Well, let's see. Yes, I could. I'm not sure how far I can go with that, but
right.
We're trying to have a pilot project that would address having at least 2 buses in 3 zones, 2 to 4 buses in 3 zones of Minnesota, northern, central, and southern. And it would be a pretty generous amount that might allow more participation. And the idea is to be able to study the results of having those electric buses in operation in Minnesota to advise us on future electric bus grant programs. So the initial one will probably be coming out very soon. So that's about all I think I can say on that. Unless there, I mean, if you have specifics, like an electric school bus does cost about $350,000, so they are not cheap.
Right.
And a diesel school bus.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, a diesel school bus would cost about $85,000-$90,000. Just to give you a little comparison.
That's helpful. I wasn't sure how much they cost. That, you know, he can't talk about RFPs that are in development and haven't come out yet. So that's sometimes Mark will say, I can't really answer that. Another related question was, will buses be spread across urban and rural school districts? And I think you probably have addressed that the plan is not just for them to be in urban areas necessarily.
Correct. Are we talking about school buses or?
Yes, school buses.
Yeah. We would like to have both Metro and Greater Minnesota take part in this and be operating. So, because the operation needs can be a lot different. Routes can be longer or shorter, etc. So it does make a difference.
Great. One last question about school buses. How will leased school buses be treated? I don't know if you have a response to that.
How will they be treated?
We can leave this. We can maybe follow up with and answer this. We've got a couple more questions, and then we're going to need to move on so we can stay on time. We've got a packed agenda. So maybe we'll leave that one for Rebecca. So one question is, how can we connect with corridor developers to suggest a site? We're going to talk about that a little bit more further in some of the next section, actually. So we'll talk about that in the next section. And then the one last question from my colleague Shannon in Northwest is the intent that charging station use will be free to users? In other words, can a city charge a fee for use of the charger to offset energy costs and repair and replacement costs?
Will it be free?
Right. Is the intent that the charging station use will be free to users? I mean, isn't that up to the charging station, or is there a rule?
Right. That's up to the entity that installs and has ownership of the chargers. So there's
not a requirement that it's free.
Correct. Yeah, it's not a requirement, but yep. Yeah, it could be
Great.
a
Thank you.
way to attract visitors. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. We have one more question. We'll try to get to that at the end. So thank you so much, Mark. That was really wonderful. And here's the information for Mark and Rebecca. And we'll include that in the follow-up as well so folks can get connected to them and ask questions. So thank you. Our next section, we're going to talk about phase one, what has already happened. I mean, that's a big part of what we wanted to do is share some experience, lessons learned from phase one. And we're thrilled to have Zep Energy, Jim Goodman from Zep Energy, which was the developer that had the contract for the DC fast charger corridors in phase one to talk about what that was like and lessons learned, et cetera, and perhaps talk a little bit about what are they looking for in communities, host sites, as they do that work along the corridor. So Jim, go ahead and turn on your camera and join us.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. So yeah, thanks so much for the invite. This is really a joy to be able to present here and frankly just to educate. I think that's what I'm here for, and love to get going. So if you don't mind, next slide. So quick, I only got one slide like this. I know we're tight, but this is who we are and what we do. We're a vertically integrated EV charging company. We can accommodate most use cases. I think really all of them. Our product lineup is shown right there. You got 3 level 2 chargers on the left, and then there's a one model of fast charger on the right there. The biggest one. That's actually the unit that's going in 21 of the 22 sites for the phase 1 project. And the second unit in a pedestal mounted kind of black colored unit, that's going to be joining one of those fast chargers for each one of those sites. But in any case, we really love what we're doing, and we think we provide a kind of a unique combination of facets of our firm, which you can read there. Next slide, please. Here we go. This is really the meat of it here. Lessons from phase 1. So as mentioned, we applied to phase 1. There was 4 defined corridors. We applied to all of them. I'll just share with, I think, this group that, it wasn't an expectation that we'd win all 4, but we did. And the pricing, frankly, across the 4 bidders that did provide, I think, pricing for either one or more of the corridors was really close. I think that's publicly available data, but I think that variance between the low and the high was on the order of maybe 6 or 7%. So that just speaks to, frankly, I think how well the MPCA wrote this grant. I believe that giving a corridor, to a developer allows a developer to do what I think a developer does best, is try and get a team together that wants to see something work. So just on the point, these are the questions that I got. So I just answered them kind of directly, and I thought I'd give you a little more context. Were the requirements of the phase 1 RFP challenging to work with? No, they really weren't. And I'll get into some of those requirements kind of in what we're looking for out of a site host later. But we really appreciated the balance in the RFP between structure and flexibility. You kind of have to have some certain amount of structure to make sure that you can, I think, judge the applicants, in an apples to apples sense, but also some flexibility on how you're handling things like how to future-proof a site and what technology you're proposing and things like that. So it was quite a well-written document, and I think it's frankly being, in effect, kind of copied by a lot of other states across the nation. Secondly, how was the process? Was it smooth, or were there some hiccups? So I'm actually thinking about kind of the execution process here, like building out this site, right? And I think that's really the context we want to be talking about here too. The application process itself was pretty smooth, but the execution, I'd say, was pretty smooth as well. And there's a couple of hiccups that that did come up, and these are really, frankly, some learnings on my side, but rate structure is quite important. So if I had to, that's like the electricity rate structure. So when you think about the business of EV charging, the costs, of supporting an electric vehicle charger are the cost of electricity and the cost to maintain that site. And it doesn't, based upon our adoption rate, like how many people have EVs in this region, in way northern Minnesota, for instance? Well, actually not a lot. So the expectation that these chargers right out of the gate are going to be used a lot is just a false expectation. They're used some, and it's growing. And you really, really need grant programs like this to make it economical to put project sites in far off lands. So I want to just mention that the rate is quite important. So if you have an electricity rate that's really demand laden, meaning when someone pulls up a 50 kilowatt charger, 50 kilowatts starts coming out of it. And if there's a demand rate that costs money per kilowatt, right, versus per kilowatt hour, that's actually really hard to make the economics work out. So I just wanted to tell the cities, working with, you're a muni or you have a co-op coverage or even IOU coverage, ensuring that you've got a rate that's not laden with demand or has a rate that's sort of flexible with respect to how to accommodate demand as energy sales grow. That's important, and I can speak more about that later. What surprised me about the process of building these? Well, here is the truth. This was a very popular program. When I would go to a site host, a site community, it's usually an overwhelmingly positive response. And that was really important. I needed help in development. I needed a local champion to accommodate kind of what's a good place to site this. Is there a municipal lot that's available? Is there a private entity, a private company that has a lot that would be willing to prescribe dedicated parking to EV charging? So I was just really overwhelmed with how positive it was and how easy it was, frankly, to get a local champion to sort of be an on-the-ground resource. So I'm building out at present 22 of these sites. So just having a local champion is really important. Now, how would I have done things differently? If I had to start over, here's what I would have done. I think primarily, I would have really dialed in my collateral with respect to what the site looks like physically, what it looks like, what's going to be there, how do they operate, and kind of put that on sort of 2 pages versus like 10, right? So really being simple. These sites are not all that complicated. There's a level 2 dual head charger, and there's a 50 kilowatt fast charger, at least for this phase 1. So really what's realized physically is these 2 chargers, but what kind of goes into getting electricity to them and where the equipment has to be located to make it an economical build, and how much parking you need, and what, you have to have 24/7, 365 access and lighting. And, so there's some things that you really need kind of a local person to help with. And I wish I would have been a little cleaner with respect to getting that information to people up front. And then the second point on here, I call it combined engagement. So I found clear success, one, with respect to if I'm interfacing like on a phone call or a Zoom call, kind of here in COVID-19, our COVID-19 paradigm, having the utility and the site host on the call at the same time was a big deal. So that's just maybe a little bit of a call to people that want to host sites to make sure that if you're not the utility, if you're not a municipality, for instance, and have kind of jurisdiction maybe over both electricity and the site, if you're in a muni lot, just having some connectivity to your utility early is really important. And then frankly, getting on the phone, it's very efficient to have a site host and the utility on the phone at the same time. Additionally, I had talked about my second point about approval timing. Well, a lot of approvals for these sites are on a schedule. If they're in a muni site, for instance, they're on a city council schedule. So in effect, if you miss 1 month, or you miss one on a bi-monthly, you got to wait a couple of weeks. So I think it's kind of a point of early and often communication, really clean, and make sure you have the stakeholders on the phone. Advice I give folks interested in applying. So I'm sorry, I wrote this as myself, but I think this goes for you too, but having a kind of a dedicated resource like that champion defined, I think would be just great. Like, here is the EV kind of person, a little bit of a project manager that really, you know, flies the EV flag. That's pretty handy. And also, you know, some sort of clear semblance of, I think almost, they really know the town quite well. That's handy, of course, too. Of course, you'll know your respective towns very well and your service territories, but really getting in your head, having kind of a PM that's available to be that champion. I write this kind of in jest, but it's a real point. Like, turf is your friend, and public parking lots located next to turf are even friendlier. So when you think about the capital expenditure of building out one of these sites, it's really handy to be able to put, for instance, your new utility transformer. We have another piece of equipment called a mini sub that we put between the transformer and the chargers. So these big pieces of equipment, these big boxes, right? Those really need to, I think in an economical sense, need to be in turf. It's not required, but when you think about being able to build a project on budget, if I'm, for instance, building a site that's all in hardscape, all in bituminous, or all in concrete, that pushes up my execution costs a lot. And I'd even see about 100% swing between being able to install the primary equipment in a turfy area versus in hardscape. So I learned that lesson hard a couple times here, and just really had to take a bath a little bit with respect to really more expensive executions. But really, that was the outlier to most of these executions where, you know, I could place this stuff in turf. I think that's it on this slide. Next slide, please.
And Jim, you have -2 minutes, so if you can try to be more succinct in the next couple, that'd be awesome. Oh, it looks like Tracy's next.
I think I am done. Yeah, I am succinct.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we'll have questions. We'll have Tracy present, and then we'll have some question and answers. So I'm really happy to have Tracy Hodel from the City of St. Cloud to talk about her experience with the level 2 or with a DC fast charger.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Diana, for the request to, for the opportunity really to share kind of St. Cloud's side of our fast charger install in St. Cloud. I think we're one of, I don't know how many, Jim, do you know how many are on phase 1 fast chargers are up and running right now?
Up and running, I think I've got 6, and there's 10 being built right now. So, okay. Yeah.
And I think, were we the second one to get up and running around there?
That's right. We kind of wanted to get a jump start, so we built 2 in the dead of the winter. And that was Marshall and St. Cloud. Yep. Awesome.
Thanks, Jim, for the update. And just wanted to give everybody a perspective kind of how early we were on as far as the fast charging install. Really want to just kind of share St. Cloud's perspective and how the process went, and an overview of the project, especially focusing on the construction phase and some of the things that Jim had just brought up recently here. So today I'm just going to kind of go through a very quick, not a long presentation here, just an overview of the project itself, kind of focus on, okay, what paperwork, planning, design work was the city involved in as far as being the host site for this charger, and then go through some of the details on our construction phase, some of the lessons learned there, and then just summarize and finish up with kind of where EV charging fits into our energy initiative in St. Cloud that we've been doing a lot of work in. Next slide. All right, so here is our project timeline. So one thing that we were surprised of was just kind of the length of time from, you know, working on the letter of interest with Zeph Energy. They had contacted us and said, hey, you know, looking for a location on the Highway 10 corridor and the I-94 corridor. St. Cloud obviously fits that area, a metro regional area. And so we said, yeah, we're definitely interested. It really aligned with kind of our energy movement and our energy goals within the city itself. So So after that letter of interest was submitted to Zeph Energy, so they could submit that with their application packet to the MPCA, then really we didn't have a whole lot of discussions until early 2019 and into summer of 2019. We were really focused on that site selection piece. Do we want to have a, I'll talk about kind of what we looked at specifically and why we chose this location. This charger here is our charger in St. Cloud, just right off Highway 10 on First Street North. And then, so we did a lot of discussions. We actually were thinking about putting it right next to the convention center, and for several reasons, we decided to move it across the street from there. Talk more about why we did that in a little bit. And then, as Jim mentioned, we do any sort of agreement with another entity, especially a long-term agreement. It does require city council approval. So in fall of 2019 is when we worked with Zeph Energy on finalizing that site host agreement and went to our council. We had a very favorable response from our council. They're very excited about it. As Jim mentioned, just very positive about getting this EV infrastructure in St. Cloud. And then we had hoped to finish construction and be done by the end of 2019. A couple of things happened there that didn't allow that to happen. But we did get a good start on it in winter, just right after Thanksgiving. We got some work done, and I'll show you what we were able to get done. And then in spring of 2020, we commissioned the unit, and it's up and running right now. Next slide. All right, so just a little bit overview kind of on the paperwork planning design phase. Again, mentioned in 2018 was the letter of interest where we kind of met with Zeph Energy representatives to see if we could partner on a location. Again, site selection, we chose this site, and you can kind of see in the right-hand corner, it's right across from our River's Edge Convention Center. And we really wanted it close to downtown, next to retail, next to restaurants. We also have a hotel just one block south of this charger. So, anybody staying at a hotel that wanted to have a charge, they could use it as well. And then in August and September, I don't remember the exact date, but Zeph Energy was formally notified by the MPCA that they did get the grant. And so then we really pushed it in high gear after that, and we worked on that site host agreement, and then went to council for it, and then started going back and forth, which is part of the site host agreement, was reviewing that design then and put that into that agreement. And kind of some lessons learned in this phase of the project was really, I wish we would have had all of our project team together early on, even during the letter of interest time, to just kind of identify, hey, if this did go through, who is the project team? Who is that champion? And we kind of, because we weren't sure if the award was going to happen, so we kind of didn't have a whole lot of people involved, but it would have been very nice on our side to get a few more people from our area departments and divisions within the city to kind of be involved, because that did create some communication issues as we moved into construction phase. And I think that's really because charging infrastructure is fairly new for communities and fairly new for city personnel and city departments. And so it's a new task, right? So who is that person that Jim talked about? Who's that champion? So in this project, I think our champion kind of moved. We had someone at the beginning, we had someone in the middle, and then someone during construction phase that kind of was that champion. And I would agree, I think just having one and then having a team to support that champion would have been the best approach to go. Then we went to design phase again, kind of making sure that we got everybody involved. And I would agree with Jim's recommendation of having the utility there. We learned that after the fact, and just, we'd have our own city staff on site, and then we'd have another meeting with utility, and we should have just had everybody there at the same time. And that's when we had some miscommunications happening during that phase. Next slide. All right, so this is construction phase. Like I said, we were really hoping to have it done by the end of 2019. We got the excavation work done. We got the conduit done, lots of the concrete poured. City staff did remove the sidewalk, and to prepare for it. And then equipment delivery was delayed. That was one of the reasons why we weren't able to get done before. And then we also had issues with Excel Energy with getting on the schedule to get that primary service installed and meter transformer installation happened. So it just didn't quite happen at the end of the year, but we got there. In February is when Excel came on site, and then we commissioned as well in early spring there. One thing during the construction phase, I think that was something unique, and I don't know if Jim has seen that in any other projects or even level 2 or the fast charging projects, is just that we had being downtown, we had large natural gas lines, so the gas utility, getting them involved as well. And this required, because of such large lines in the area, we had to have city trained or other trained personnel on site during the excavation. And I think that was really unique and new to the contractor that was running this installation. So that was something of a little bit of a hiccup, but we ended up working through that fairly quickly and getting the right people there to watch the installation. Next slide. So here's just a few more construction slides. Again, removing the concrete, our city public works staff did that. And then we had all the concrete pad pours for like the bollards, for the charging stations themselves, for the new transformer over here in the middle there, and setting that. So we were aggressive with kind of getting all that conduit in as well. And so really it was just putting the new infrastructure on top of everything. Next slide. All right, so this is what our final project area looks like. We did have 4 parking spaces, 2 for the fast charger, 2 for the level 2. This gentleman here was okay with taking his picture while he was getting his unit, his vehicle charged at the time. So we've been kind of watching PlugShare and looking at the comments, and everyone seems to be very positive and excited about having it at this location. And right now, DEF is allowing customers to use it free of charge to just get familiar with the location, the equipment, and so forth. And I'm not sure when that charging is when they're going to start charging for that on the customer side of things. Next slide. All right, just so to wrap up here, we really wanted to just show how the EV infrastructure ties into our energy and sustainability initiative. We've been doing a ton of work on energy and clean energy, and we've done energy efficiency projects. We've done a lot of solar, on-site solar, over 2.5 million kilowatt hours of solar being generated on city facilities and structures and property. And we have over 22 million kilowatt hours subscribed to community solar gardens. We've developed a community energy plan with our utility provider in partnership with them, and have all our stakeholders on board. We're doing some really unique things at our wastewater treatment facility, and then tying in our EV infrastructure. So we're really excited about expanding that. We got our first end of 2018, we got our first EV fleet vehicle for our city forces. And then we had planned for 2020 and 2021 to get some more EV fleet vehicles. But due to COVID and budget concerns, we're not sure how many we'll be able to purchase in this year and next year yet. But we're definitely excited about it. Our residents are excited about getting more stations. Actually just was at a council meeting last week, and they were asking, hey, are we getting some other locations throughout the city for public charging stations? So trying to think of any other lessons learned on the project. I think during construction, it would have been really helpful to have a weekly or bi-weekly check-in again with all the project team, and having the developer there and the contractor there, and you know, just something quick to kind of get everybody on the same page. Other than that, I'm trying to think of anything else. It was a pretty positive experience for us. You know, something new, and our residents are excited, our customers are excited. I think we picked a great spot. It seems to be doing some good use. But with that, like, open it up to any questions that anybody has.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And probably there'll be questions for Jim and Tracy. And I'll just start with, you know, I think this is for Jim. Who were your local champions? City leaders, business leaders? Were some champions more influential than others?
Yeah, so let me do this here. You know, a majority of our sites ended up being on municipal lots. So yeah, in the case of St. Cloud, we're working with municipal leaders to accommodate where to put this. It's under their jurisdiction for those lots. So that was really handy, you know, with respect to the response from St. Cloud in that regard. So usually it'd be a city champion with respect to the site host, and then in some other, like I'll give a nod to I think Drew's on the line here, but you know, for instance, Drew at Rochester Public Utilities, right? Having that champion that's not only with the utility but also knows the lay of the land with respect to the town was quite handy too. So we had maybe just 2 or 3 of the sites on private property, but usually kind of the brokering of getting to that person and finding that site was really helped along by city staff or utility staff. So that's the combo. The dream team kind of is really city staff plus a staff member from the utility. That's pretty handy.
Great, thank you. So this is aimed at you, Tracy. A couple of questions from my friend Bill in Red Wing. He's an EV champion down there. Do you have problems with EVs parking across multiple stalls, like your example picture shows? I wondered that too. I was like, why is he parked sideways? That was weird.
I don't know.
And then a second question, because it piggybacks, do you have problems with non-EVs parking in the charging spots? How do you address that?
Sure. Yeah, a couple of very good questions. I think people are just getting used to how they, maneuver and park for charging. So I think we understand that it's going to take some time to get used to that if that's a new owner or what. But really, it's hard to tell if we are going to have some major problems. And I say that because COVID has really dropped our parking. We're probably about 7 to 8% of our capacity is being used for parking right now because of COVID right now. I mean, we were pretty much on surface lots close to 80 to 90% capacity, and now we're at 7% capacity. So it's hard to tell because we haven't seen any issues yet. But one way that we have addressed that is we did put in, we just actually passed an ordinance, and we have a city ordinance. We have language related to if you have non-EV parkers, what do we do in that situation, and just basically saying that's against city ordinance to do that. And we just passed that 2 weeks ago at city council. So those are some of the ways that we're addressing that.
Great, thank you. One of the other questions was about the earlier from Mark's presentation. Is there a better map showing the cities on the corridor? On the PCA website, we'll send links to it. There's a map. I think there's a little bit better map, but then in addition, they have a table that shows exactly, Highway 210, Brainerd to Duluth, 125 miles, Highway 15, St. Cloud to New Ulm and Fairmount. So it describes better on that. So we'll send that information out to folks. So thanks for that question. If there aren't any other questions, we will have time for questions at the end. And we'll try to answer some of these others, but I'd like to move on and thank you, Tracy and Jim. Jim will be back. And I want to go to my colleague, Chris Acuna. He is a program associate at Great Plains and did some work with level 2 chargers in phase 1, and he'll share some of the lessons learned from the experience he had.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I will be going over some of the level 2 lessons learned and best practices from phase 1. As Diana shared, my name is Chris. So here is a list of all the phase 1 level 2 charger grantees and their installation locations. So I think there were 25 sites selected, kind of around the metro and around the state, with most of the chargers being available for public charging 24/7. And so there is, I'll there are some of the requirements for that the grantees had to have for level 2 installations. So there had to be a site plan that had to be approved by the MPCA, which had to include the location of the chargers, the power source of the charger, and indication of the ADA stall. At least 2 dedicated parking spaces per charger. Ballers to protect the charger if it was a standalone instead of wall mounted. EV parking only striping, as well as a cord management system to prevent loose chargers that could be damaged. So that oftentimes looks like a hook or a place to wrap the charger, or a lot of chargers have the retractable cord. And then the phase 1 level 2 chargers needed to have a renewable energy component. So that's like buying RECs from your local utility, or another renewable component as approved by the MPCA. So it also had to include a 5-year warranty, which a lot of the installers and vendors are a 2 to 3 year warranty is included kind of as default. And a lot of people are also opting for the 5-year warranty outside of the MPCA grants. And then the ADA compliance around chargers and stalls, at least 1 parking stall needed to be accessible. So the biggest lesson learned and takeaway is that the MPCA really tries to make it as straightforward as possible. And in phase 1, they provided a pretty comprehensive checklist with instructions for each part of the installation for the grantees. It includes language that you can give to vendors and installers for quotes, so they know exactly what is required for the charger and for the charger equipment requirements, and then giving instructions to your striping people, depending on if you're doing it in-house or hiring a contractor. So as you can see here, and we can send this out with the follow-up as well, it's got everything from the map requirements they need for their site plan, with the language here for the vendors. And then really the best advice is to follow the checklist to make sure every item is checked off, especially before you break ground, because you don't want to go back and have to change something in the concrete if something wasn't installed correctly, or if you need to move the charger to make sure, move charger or other pieces of concrete, you just don't want to be there. So all of the checklist. And then another thing that was a little bit tricky was some of the ADA compliance, depending on where your charger is located. So the MPCA sent out an ADA compliance guide that can be found on the Alternative Fuels Data Center website, and we can link that in the follow-up as well. So that has all the requirements for some federal of the federal ADA requirements, and then here are some example sites that the MPCA also sent out. So depending on where your charger is located, that can change the kind of accessible aisle that you might have. So another best practice is to put the ADA stall next to parking stalls that are already accessible units, so they can use the same aisle. You don't have to do restriping from that. And so here are a list of resources that we can be used for, that were used for the charging installations, and additional resources that you might find helpful. Oh, it looks like people are having trouble hearing me.
That's okay. I think Chris, this is his last slide, so he'll turn off his video And we will move on. Brandy Toft from the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe is going to share with us, since she is that star that is the only level 2 charger that's being fully reimbursed and fully completed. So Brandy, thank you for joining us, and go ahead and start. And we're a few minutes behind. I'm not going to rush you, but just so you know.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity, and to let you know that the tribes are really active in this and really want to share this information. So please go into the next slide. So the next slide, keep going. This is the picture of Leech Lake, and not many people may be familiar with this, so I want to kind of just share a few little facts. I'll let you read them on the side, but the reason that we think EV is a fantastic thing for Leech Lake is because we're transected by Highway 2 right through the middle of Leech Lake and 371 coming right up from the south. And these are major corridors, and people are driving here anyways. And to lessen our impact on the environment and not only the emissions from that, we thought EV charging is a fantastic idea and ways to do that. So you'll see the green circles on there show Cass Lake, Deer River to the east, and to the south, Walker, right at 371. Next slide, please. So this was our next step, right? We have been doing a lot of stuff in emissions reductions and being some more sustainable, and I'm just staying with vehicles on this slide here. We've done 95 vehicles, 65 school buses, on off-road vehicles in the past, and that's been through a multitude of programs, privately funded to MPCA, to EPA, and DERA funds. So we've probably touched all the funding sources. And with this one, we really want to get the charging stations at the casinos, thinking that, you know, they're already coming this way anyways. We can provide a very safe, 24-hour-a-day monitored, lighted, I can't think of a better place for charging stations to be for convenience, especially in inclement weather. And with that, we're also putting together with another funding, what I'll go in a little bit, is an EV infrastructure and procurement policy. That is something we really want to do, to build our own EV structures, especially when very, very, very soon on the radar, we are looking at an EV vehicle or even hybrid vehicle infrastructure. So one other thing on this is that we are looking also to place EV farther on the reservation. So we've done at the casino for a lot of public and even intergovernment, but also we want to go into more government structures on the reservation and spread it throughout the reservation to be more equitable. So we can, you know, we travel sometimes an hour and a half to get from one point to another point on the reservation. It'd be nice that when that person gets up there, they can charge and then get charged on the way back. And just a shout out to Mark, we were a part of the VW discussions in the Bemidji area and helped present on that. So next slide, please. So never be afraid to push boundaries. I think that's the biggest thing I can say with this and the biggest lesson I learned from this. So first off, I am not an EV expert. I am more of a grant management. I'm the whip cracker. I'm getting things done. So the application to me was okay. And what saved us, I feel, and why we had such a winning application is because we had a contractor heavily fill it out with us and very much help us. So don't forget to lean on them. You know, use them. They're the experts in the field, and they can make sure all the I's are crossed and T's are dotted. Also, this is where I learned, coordinate with local utilities and area businesses. This was so huge because I never understood how much we could get out of them and how much they needed to meet some goals, and that we could work together to meet those goals and increase EV charging. So letters of recommendation from all the utilities that we got and contributions to match. And these were just not small contributions. The know-how of our contractor and the local utilities on how to get this done was key. We were very much coordinated with them. Sometimes on a weekly, multi-weekly basis, we were having conversations. Renewable portion, we have solar installations on the reservation, and in fact, I'm working on a grant right now to install another over 500 kilowatts, so we're keeping that going. We were bit by the ADA requirement. We knew we had that checklist. It wasn't as filled out as we wanted it to be, and the fine print, but we did get this accomplished. We did find it and fix it. So you can see here with these 2 level 2 chargers at the Northern Lights Casino, they're not ADA because they're set too far back. This was great for snow removal, and my guys that do all the maintenance thought this was perfect. Bollards, snow removal, we're not going to run them over, we're not going to pile snow on them, but someone in a wheelchair will have a bit of problem. So that's been fixed after that. And overall, we have, with Rebecca and with our contractor, we had a great successful project because we all wanted to win. We were wanting to make it all work out in the end, and we figured ways to do that because we were very flexible. Everybody was flexible. Everybody got that. One other thing I want to say, coordinating with local utilities, was all of a sudden, one of the local utilities had a project that failed in another city, and they just couldn't get all the fine details worked out and everything like that. And all of a sudden we were talking to them and said, hey, we can put another one of these in. So you can see here, we have 2 level 2s at this station. Well, one of those is because the local utility changed the project from that city to Leech Lake because we had the infrastructure already put in there for it and was an easy fix. So Jim from Zeph has told me that this site here at Northern Lights, it has 3 level 2s and 1 fast charger, or will very soon. It will be the largest hub for EV charging in kind of the north central Minnesota. Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so I'm gonna let you guess which one I am. The other gentleman is my supervisor, Ben Benoit, and then one of our champions, and I love him dearly, Ed Morgan, who is an elder and works for the reservation. But even as an elder, he's saying this is the wave of the future, and he goes and charges his little Leaf there all the time at our charging stations. And so this is just a little PR campaign we had, that when the new casino opened in Cass Lake last August, we pushed super hard to get the EV charging station also online at the same time, so we could use it as some PR, but also it's there and it will attract more customers, but also just be on that corridor of Highway 2. So there's a little quote from Ed there and a little background to the story. One thing I want to say about this is the agreement with MPCA was signed on May 15th of 2019. We got rolling on it by everything done. We probably got rolling on it June 1st, and we ended on September 30th. So there was a very fast process, took a lot of effort, and we got it done. It was really great. The other thing I want to say about this is, this question came up earlier, is do you charge or not charge? We specifically chose not to charge, especially for the level 2s. We didn't feel that the revenue would be anywhere close to the amount of work that would go into of getting that revenue, and we felt this was more of a community service than it was a revenue maker. It just doesn't pan out for us, and so that we went forward, and all our level 2 chargers are free of charge. We want people to have that ability to do that and do a little bit for the environment. Next slide, please. So goals to keep in mind. Okay, so once you do this, and you just kind of keep building on it, you keep leveraging these funds with the VW funds and other projects. So we currently have a grant with CERTs, and that grant is for guidance and policy work, and one of those is what I've said before, is the EV infrastructure and procurement policy. So I have that. And then there's the other things like fuel security, energy assurance, and sovereignty, almost. Economic benefits or expansion of that work, of that sustainability work. And you can see below the health benefits, the greenhouse gas reductions, and just being leaders. Like, someone's got to lead this. Someone's got to show that this is going to work. And this is one way that we feel we can do this. So I want to give a little story. Of course, with COVID, I'm just back in the office now. I've been working at home, but I was out for four months. And the casino was also shut down for a long time, about 3 months. And I drove by. And one day when I drove by, there was one car in the parking lot. And that car was charging. And I bet I looked like the craziest person in the world. I'm going down Highway 2, just fist pumping and yelling and screaming and so happy that that was the only car in the parking lot. And I was pretty stoked. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so moral of the story. This is, sometimes when you get misquoted in the newspapers, you're always like, oh God, that was weird. But this gal misquoted me. And I've always said this is a fuel of the dream scenario. That's a great way to twist my misquote, because I really meant to say, fuel the dream scenario. If you build it, they will come. I mean, it's just a classic line. And that's what it is. If you build the EV structure, yes, we don't have 1,000 EVs here, but we have more than we think. And if you build it, you create that corridor, you bring more folks with that economic mind, you bring more of that transportation our way. And if a few people go into the casino for food or a little fun or whatever it may be, so be it. That's like not even a tertiary, that's like a part Z of the whole equation. But that's what we're at. So I love the fuel a dream. I kind of love that misquote. So again, when opportunity knocks, grab it. You never know what it could lead. We just want to leave this a better place, and we want to be more sustainable in all our angles. And I could talk another hour about all the sustainability work that Leech Lake is doing. So with that, there's my last slide and my email. I welcome anyone to contact us. We're great partners. We can share what we've done. I'm energetic and I'm really meek and mild, and I don't say much. So we always like to share our story, and this is part of it today. So thank you so much, and look forward to questions.
Thanks so much, Brandy. We're going to actually hold on questions till the end. So we're going to move right to Jim. We're running short on time. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we will then answer them as much as we can through the chat and at the end. So Jim, keep it tight, and why don't you talk to us a little bit about what's the outlook for phase 2?
Okay, go for it. Next slide. You can go back, you can go beyond this one. This is the pitch again. And probably go beyond this one too. I'll just get to the meat here. Here you go. What makes a good site? Kind of a compliant site. Fit the spec, close to the corridor. And there'll be a definition there. I think I have noticed that if the site's really great, a little bit pushing out of that mileage requirement has been accepted in the past. I think I try and be responsible with that, of course. But I think the spec was 2 miles, and I might have one that's 2 1/4, something like that. So just within reason, right? Not 10 miles, right? The point is you're on a corridor, you jump off of it, you get charging pretty quick. And then the sites, yeah, 24/7, 365 access to the public. I think as Tracy mentioned St. Cloud before, this site that was right next to the convention center, like right next to it, had a gate. And that's problematic. You kind of want to just be able to drive in here at any time to use it. It's well lit, short walking distance, room to grow. So the future-proofing component of our phase 1 and how Zev chose to attack it was make the electrical infrastructure that we're installing capable of taking additional power from the utility, even if they had to replace the transformer, but make our stuff kind of capable of having more chargers put on it. So an electrical kind of future-proofing in an infrastructure sense, a parking future-proofing too. So enough parking to accommodate growth kind of right off the bat, whether that's with another level 3 charger or more level 2 chargers at that same site. I mentioned that turf issue, just in an economical execution. It's nice to have, here's a grassy area right next to the parking. There you go, 3-phase power very near with a lower distribution voltage. So I think one of our most expensive kind of drops, you know, from the utility was on a particular site that had 34.5 running by it. So a 34.5 kilovolt distribution service, that makes for a large transformer, a really big one. And so it works a little better just economically to have a 16.9 or a 15.4 distribution voltage, so that the delta between that and the 483 phase that's needed to power these sites isn't so large. I have had some counterparties kind of have stuff ready. I think they heard about the project, and I think in 1 or 2 cases, they had done some proactive planning of those parking lots that were built, you know, after the RFP was let, but before it got awarded, to kind of include some conduit runs already. So that's handy, not required, you know, but it's just handy. Here we go. What do we look for the most? You know, fit the spec. You can see it there, and it will be really detailed in the phase 2 application itself, I suspect. Again, that defined champion, the dream team of like a Cytos champion plus a utility, kind of mind melding and then interfacing with that developer. And an understanding that this is just the beginning. So I think when you think about these sites and what a city is doing already with respect to sustainability and carbon reduction, et cetera, these can serve as kind of to punctuate an equilibrium or to help kind of push the ball regarding, well, we're getting EV charging, what else should we do? And when I say just the beginning, when we put a DCFC site in a town and there's room for more, people start thinking about fleet vehicles, right? Oh, I can get, you know, and really when I think about the winners in the game of EV charging, a primary winner is the driver of the car or the owner of the fleet vehicle. They have much lower operational costs, both on fueling the vehicle as well as in maintenance. So if you can run a spreadsheet out 5 years, and it's getting shorter and shorter as these electric vehicles get cheaper and cheaper, and as they have more capabilities, like right at present, you really can't produce a heavy haul diesel, right, with a economically priced EV in the passenger realm, okay? Like as stated earlier, 350 grand for an electric bus, right, versus 85. We're seeing that delta just get totally crunched with respect to the difference in those pricings. The passenger vehicles were already there. You can go buy one and you'll save a bunch of money over a very short window, or you can lease a Tesla Model 3 and it's $300 a month. You know, not to say that that's cheap, but it's certainly on par with leasing a vehicle of similar capabilities. So you can kind of use this to jumpstart, I think, additional programming or add to your current programming. That's all I had.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate it. So questions in the Q&A. And our last presenter today is my colleague, Caitlin Bachman, and she'll talk about some of those level 2 siting considerations.
All right, good morning, everyone. So like Diana said, I'm Caitlin Bachland, and I'm a program manager with the Transportation and Fuels Department at Great Plains Institute, and also oversee Drive Electric Minnesota. So excited to be here today, and my role is really to get you excited about the upcoming RFP for phase 2 under the Volkswagen Settlement funds that MPCA is overseeing. So gonna go through this fairly quickly, but all of this information will be sent out to you later, and it's also available on the Drive Electric Minnesota website. So we can advance, and yep, continue to advance, Chris. And again, perfect. So the first thing you'll want to think about is really just the site preference. Keep in mind that for level 2, people are going to be spending anywhere from about 2 to 4 hours at these locations. So look for places that are near some place for them to do. So good examples can include parks, theaters, libraries, hotels, downtown areas, and the list goes on from there. And then there's also going to be, and I should just say that I do not have my video on right now, just to make sure that my audio comes through okay. So just letting you all know. If you are looking to install more of a private location that can be used for public use as well, you can look for workplaces. Next slide. The second thing you'll want to consider is proximity to power. For level 2, your goal here is just to reduce your installation costs. So the closer you can be to that 240 volt power, the better and the least expensive it's going to be. Next slide. So another consideration, again, just to keep costs as low as possible for you, look for those locations that are undergoing either redevelopment or new development, because your, well, the concrete is already going to be ripped up during this process, right? So you don't have to rip up any concrete as part of the construction for the installation. And then, you know, while you're doing that, just to save costs in the future, might as well add some conduit for future chargers. Next slide. Another important component for the MPCA is going to be environmental justice. And Mark touched on this earlier, but as part of the RFP, you do receive points as part of that overall scoring. So if you can identify locations that serve vulnerable populations, including tribal areas, low-income residents, and people of color, that's going to be really important for your application. Additionally, you want to think about locations that are near urban centers or highway corridors, because that's where a lot of pollution happens. So if we go to the next slide, it'll show you kind of the map that's available on the MPCA's website. And the link is included there. We'll get that out in the slides. So I encourage you to visit this site and see if there's locations in your community that will work. Next slide. All right, so another consideration for level 2 is going to be renewable energy. And there's a couple of different ways that you can connect to renewable energy for your charging station. You can either connect directly on site, and the most common application that we see is connecting to a solar panel on site. So that's going to maximize the value of the on-site solar during the day, because that energy has a place to go no matter what. And it's really good to put in locations where vehicles are for sure going to be charging during the day. So for example, that could be workplaces, parking ramps, or other locations like that. The other consideration or other way to do this is through a utility program. So a lot of utilities offer programs powered through either wind or solar or other renewable energy. This is a great option if you cannot connect directly on site, and it can sometimes be more affordable than that direct installation. So just another way to get that renewable energy connected to your station and still get points for it when you're submitting the application to the MPCA. So we are going to have some resources coming out on this, but not quite ready yet. So look for it in August. And if you do have any specific questions on this, Brian Ross at GPI is really our resident expert on this topic. Next slide. Just some general best practices here. You know, it can be really important to identify shovel-ready sites. So if you've already installed conduit or other areas in your community have installed conduit, that can be like, it's already getting you a foot in the door and keeping that installation cost down. You know, as others were saying on this call, turf is important, and installing at areas that you already own, then you won't need site host agreements and you can have greater control over that installation. So look for those locations as well. Installing in larger lots means you're taking up less of the entire lot. So for some communities, that can be a really important consideration to keep in mind. And lastly, looking for covered areas will just help ensure that your charging station is covered from weather elements such as snow, and just makes the maintenance a little bit easier. So if we go to the next slide, this just, all of the information that I just covered is available on the Drive Electric Minnesota website. So if you go to driveelectricmn.org/charging, it's actually charging guidance. I left off the actual link, but we have site selection guidelines up there. It's a Prezi, and then you can also download an actual checklist. So you can advance to the next couple of slides here. And again, yep. So this is just that PDF that you can download. All right, so moving on. Just gonna give you some considerations when you're looking. So you've selected a site, and now what should you consider as you're looking to install at that particular site? So for public charging stations, again, you want to install as close to the power source as possible. You've heard this before, but locating it in a visible area that's well lit can be really important. And then lastly, just locating it near an entrance if possible. It can be a really nice perk for EV drivers. Next slide. Fleet charging, again, keep your installation costs down and install as close to that power source as possible. Keeping it in a visible area is going to be really important. And then if you are looking to keep it reserved strictly for your fleet, you might want to consider looking at a gated area. Next slide. And lastly, workplace charging. A lot of the same considerations here. You know, install as close to that power source as possible and look for visible areas to install it in. All right, so just wanted to mention a couple of other additional resources as you're thinking about good locations for that level 2 RFP. Our partner Shift to Electric has a lot of great resources specifically on multi-unit dwelling charging and workplace charging. So if you're looking for those considerations, I encourage you to check out this website. And then the next one is mudcharging.com. So that's related to Shift to Electric site, and it's a site that they oversee, but just gives you more information about providing charging for condos and apartment buildings. All right, and then my last slide, just kind of getting you thinking about concrete next steps here. I encourage you to use the information and resources that you received today and start identifying those potential sites in your community. Secondly, once you've started to identify those potential sites, start engaging with those potential site hosts about charging stations, their interest, and try and get them on board to actually submit an application. And your entire goal here is really to get people excited, get people bought in before that RFP is published, so that when it is, you already have a lot of the pre-work done and you can focus on the actual application. So with that, I will turn things back over to Diana for the Q&A.
All right, thank you for that. I think that was the fastest I've ever heard you talk. I hate that we had to rush you. We have time for question and answer. We've got 5 minutes still. Type your questions in. If we can't get to them, we will respond to them with the
Diane, I think we lost you.
I think we did lose Diana. I am happy to play the role of Q&A here. So if you do have any questions, please insert them into the Q&A, and we have about 5 minutes. So just a comment here from Bill Gain, but locating chargers near entrances can cause some issues with icing, which, if you haven't heard of that term, is internal combustion engines parking in charging spots. So he just encourages you to think twice about that location strategy.
I'm back. So I was trying to turn off my timer, and I ended my phone call. Apologies. So it looks like somebody had their hand raised here. I can't see who that is. Oh, it is Kathy Bloomquist. I don't know where she went. Kathy. Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
See where, well, she put her hand down. Oh, there she is again. Okay, so I'll allow her to talk. Okay, go ahead, Kathy. You can unmute yourself and talk. We can hear you. Go ahead. It's very hard to hear you. It might be better if you can type your question in.
It sounds like she's saying that she accidentally clicked the button.
Okay. So, I don't know what other, so there's a question here from Christopher. Does GPI help local businesses as well as local governments in implementing an EV station plan? We are certainly able to especially point to folks to the resources that we have on the Drive Electric Minnesota site. There are a ton of resources there. We can certainly answer some questions for you. And so, you know, again, there's so many resources on Drive Electric. And the other thing I wanted to share with folks that we haven't talked about is that as you do this, it's important to educate people in your community about electric vehicles. And we have a ton of resources also to help with communicating about EVs generally. We have some EV quizzes, we have some other really fun things that you can do as well. So we can certainly direct businesses to some resources and answer some questions. There's a question about, have any of our regional gas stations, Quick Trip, Casey's, Holiday, put much out about hosting chargers? Caitlin, do you know the answer to that?
I think there are a few, you know, the ones that I've seen at Quick Trips at least have typically been level 1 stations rather than level 2. But Shell recently acquired Green Lots, and so I know that company is particularly looking closely at charging stations, including DC fast chargers.
Great, thank you. There's another question here. I may have missed this at some point, but assuming there is capacity to deal with demand issues, will there be a funding program for DC fast chargers? I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, what we're talking about here, the funding program for DC fast chargers, we're talking about Volkswagen funding, so there's that. I don't know if you mean something beyond that. So I'm not sure.
I have an interesting example about that where Dairyland Power, right, understanding that not convincing, but having all the utilities be comfortable, for instance, with maybe the perception of the reality of demand. I think demand issues meaning demand power in an electricity sense. So Dairyland rolled out a program in an EV specific pilot rate. I think it was good for 3 years, where Dairyland, based on really a bunch of data that we provided, we could show a really low coincidence with peak based on our installed infrastructure, as well as like a real curve with respect to what's actually hitting demand. So, you know, in a demand sense, you want the entity that's causing the demand, you know, to pay for said demand. So I think to jumpstart things a little bit, Dairyland covered their member utilities on the demand side, so they could abate the risk of having to accommodate demand, and as such, was able to push out a pilot rate for their members that was energy only, and energy only works really well for DC fast charging. And that's just kind of an example of what they did. But I stated also in here with respect to rates, Excel's got a great rate, and a lot of utilities, frankly, have a great rate because they sort of understand that the density of these chargers, that won't be high. The real load growth that's seen in EV charging is at home. And so, or at multi-unit housing. So when Brandy's point about if you build it, they will come, there's kind of a psychological effect of if there's a bunch of available level 2 chargers out, people are then comfortable buying electric vehicles. And then most of their charging is actually done at their residence where they can go on TO, time of use rates. So it's a little bit like get the public chargers out there, understanding that the density of them won't be exceptionally high and their actual effect on peaking will likely be quite low. And then just use that as an impetus for people to be comfortable buying cars and then put them on time of use in a residential sense.
Okay, we're past time, but for folks that are still on, Lisa Thurston, I'm going to unmute you so you can talk. You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Okay, I just typed in my reply too. I was just saying Holiday Station at the Minneapolis by the airport has 1 level 2 charging that's free. And with the work that we do at the American Lung Association and Clean Cities, we continue to encourage stations such as Quick Trip, Holiday, and other brands to always consider installing EVSE. And this is a consistent messaging that we incorporate when we work with the stations on behalf of biofuels as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. There's one more question here. Any idea what percent, I think he means of power at charging stations is renewable? I'm not sure. I don't know if Caitlin or Chris is able to answer that.
Well,
Go ahead.
I think I know that one. Like, well, with respect to the MPCA grant, there was a requirement that they be renewable power, and that took really 2 forms. Either that utility would have a renewable program where they, have a PPA or have some part of a PPA with a renewable energy project, and they have pricing per kilowatt hour that's based on supporting those projects. Or I think maybe the lesser, you could check the box, but it's still effective, is buying RECs, and RECs are exceptionally inexpensive because there's a lot of them kind of in our region. So that's another way to do that. So I don't know if that kind of hits the question.
Great.
That's in a compliance sense. Yeah.
And I guess I was thinking about all charging stations, not just the Volkswagen ones, but yes, so for the Volkswagen ones, there's this renewable consideration. Bill Gain talking about XL Energy is 58% carbon free right now, so that's on the standard service. So depending on the electric supplier, there's also, it's different situations with percent of carbon free. So that is great. I know that there's a desire that as many as possible be connected to renewable energy. And then in the chat, Brian from Freeborn, Mauer Cooperative, Dairyland Power, Jim is correct regarding the creation of a special EV rate. It's good for 5 years. So he's thanking Jim. I think we're going to stop there. We're so happy to have had the full capacity of 100 people on the webinar. There might have been some people that weren't able to get on because that's the limit. We will send out follow-up information, links, and other things for folks. And, thank you all to all of our panelists for sharing their experience. And we're very happy that folks could join us and have a great Thursday. Thanks, everyone.